Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Calming Sleepy Story. My name is Brian. I am an English storyteller. Today, I share with you a horror story named The Whispering House, and I hope you enjoy it a lot with deep sleeping. Let's get started. The Whispering House. Chapter 1: The Move-In. It was late October when Rachel and Mark Connolly pulled into the cracked gravel driveway of their new home. The afternoon sun hung low over the leafless maples, sending pale fingers of light across the sagging porch. The house, a pale clapboard Colonial that leaned slightly to one side, had stood on this Massachusetts hill since 1775. At least that's what the brass plaque by the door claimed. Rachel stepped out first, hugging her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. Mark popped the trunk and started unloading boxes, whistling to mask the creak of the floorboards underfoot. "Feels like the house is sighing every time you walk in," Rachel said, her voice echoing off the empty walls. Mark just grinned. "She's got character, that's all. Old houses breathe. They'd gotten it cheap, suspiciously cheap," their realtor admitted. "It's a bit of a fixer-upper," she'd said, tapping the faded wallpaper. But Rachel had fallen for the sloping ceilings, the wide plank floors, and the way the sun made the old glass windows shimmer. They spent the first few hours setting up the bare minimum: an air mattress in the bedroom, a camp stove in the kitchen, and a single lamp perched on a stack of moving boxes. Their real furniture wouldn't arrive until Monday. By nightfall, the wind had picked up. It rattled the loose shutters and made the house groan. Mark fell asleep instantly. He could sleep through a hurricane. But Rachel lay awake, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with her eyes. That's when she heard it. It started as a hush, like wind sneaking through the old walls. But the longer she listened, the more it sounded like words. Soft, urgent, impossible to make out, but words all the same. She sat up, holding her breath. Mark shifted beside her and snored. The whispers stopped. Rachel lay back down. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe it was the house settling. But as she drifted off, she could swear she heard it again. Closer this time, just below the floorboards. "Help us." Chapter 2. Settling in. By morning, Rachel convinced herself she'd imagined it. Moving was stressful. New surroundings always played tricks on her mind. She made coffee in the drafty kitchen while Mark wrestled with the ancient fuse box in the basement. Outside, a late autumn drizzle tapped at the windows. Rachel stood at the sink, staring at the overgrown backyard. Somewhere under all those weeds was the garden she'd dreamed of. A place for tulips and tomatoes, maybe even a little greenhouse someday. "Help us." The words flickered at the edge of her memory like the last hint of a dream. She shook it off and focused on unpacking. By mid-afternoon, Mark was hauling boxes up from the car when a knock rattled the front door. Rachel opened it to find a short, gray-haired woman in a raincoat, clutching a pie dish under one arm. "Hi there. I'm Ellen from next door." The woman's voice was warm, but her eyes darted past Rachel's shoulder into the dim hallway. I saw you moving in yesterday. Thought you might like something sweet. That's so kind, Rachel said, stepping aside. Come in, please. I'm Rachel. My husband's around here somewhere, covered in dust. Ellen laughed, though it sounded thin. She set the pie on the kitchen counter and took in the peeling wallpaper and exposed beams. I grew up just down the road, she said. This house, it's got a lot of history. Mark emerged from the basement, wiping his hands on his jeans. Hi, you must be the welcoming committee. They all sat around the wobbly kitchen table, eating pie straight from the dish. Ellen asked polite questions about where they'd moved from. Boston, just a 2-hour drive but a world away from the sleepy hillside. She told them about the local diner, the library, the best spot to see the leaves change. But when the conversation drifted back to the house, Ellen's fingers tightened around her fork. You know, she said, lowering her voice, this place has always had stories. Rachel felt her stomach clench. What kind of stories? Oh, nothing you need to worry about, I'm sure, Ellen said quickly. Just old tales. Revolutionary War spies, secret tunnels. Kids trying to scare each other, mostly. Spies. Mark perked up. That's pretty cool, actually. Ellen nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. They say this house was used for secret meetings. Messages hidden in the walls under the floorboards. Some folks believe a few people never left. Mark chuckled, but Rachel's fingers went cold around her coffee mug. Ellen patted Rachel's hand. Don't mind me. I just like my ghost stories. Old houses creak and whisper. It's just the wind finding its way in. Happens all the time. When Ellen left an hour later, Rachel walked her to the door. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and still. Ellen paused on the porch, pie dish hugged to her chest. If you ever hear anything strange, she said, so quietly Rachel almost didn't catch it. Don't be afraid to talk back. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to listen. Then she hurried down the steps, her boots squelching in the wet grass. Rachel stood in the doorway long after Ellen disappeared behind the hedges. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faintest echo, or maybe just a trick of her mind. Listen. Chapter 3. The First Night Alone. By Sunday afternoon, Rachel and Mark had made a small dent in the mountain of boxes. They ate cold pizza on the living room floor, surrounded by half-empty mugs and crumpled newspaper. Tomorrow's the big day, Mark said between bites. Real bed, real couch, actual hot water, if I can figure out the boiler. Rachel managed to smile. And you're back at work tomorrow, too? Yeah. Gotta check in at the office. Just a couple days a week till we're settled. He nudged her foot with his. You'll be okay here alone? Rachel hesitated. The whispering house loomed around them, the corners dark where the single lamp couldn't reach. She didn't want to sound ridiculous. After all, what would she say? I'm scared of the walls talking. I'll be fine, she lied. That night, the wind picked up again. Mark fell asleep instantly as usual. Rachel lay awake, the pizza box still on the coffee table, the house creaking and shifting like an old ship. At some point, she drifted off, only to snap awake to the cold hush of early morning. The digital clock blinked 3:17 a.m. in harsh green numbers. She turned her head toward Mark. He snored softly, one arm draped over his chest. Then she heard it. This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a voice, low, urgent, almost pleading. Under the floor. Rachel froze. Her heart thudded so loudly she wondered if the voice could hear it. Help us. Under. She sat up, the floor cold under her bare feet. She tiptoed across the room and pressed her ear to the wall. Nothing, just the hollow tick of the old pipes. She crept down the narrow hallway, past the stack of boxes that smelled faintly of cardboard and old books. The sound came again, this time from beneath her slippers. She knelt, pressing her palm to the wide plank floorboards. The wood was cold, almost damp. Under. She jumped back, nearly knocking over a lamp. Mark stirred in the bedroom but didn't wake. Rachel backed away from the floor, her breath misting in the cold hallway. She pulled her cardigan tight around her shoulders and stumbled back to bed. She lay there until the first gray light of dawn spilled through the window. Mark woke with a stretch and a grin, none the wiser. "Sleep okay?" he asked, kissing her forehead. Rachel forced a smile. "Yeah, fine." When Mark left for work that morning, Rachel watched his car disappear down the winding driveway. Then she turned back to the hallway, staring at the floorboards where she'd heard the voice. She fetched an old butter knife from the kitchen and pried gently at the edges of the wood. Dust puffed out in gray clouds. The plank lifted with a groan. Underneath was darkness and something else. She squinted into the narrow gap. Tucked in the shadows was a scrap of yellowed parchment, brittle as old leaves. She reached for it with trembling fingers. The paper flaked at her touch, but she could still make out the words, scrawled in hurried ink. "They know. We hide here." Chapter 4. Digging into the past. Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor, the splintered plank beside her, the fragile scrap of parchment spread out on an old moving box. The words were faded but legible enough. She traced them with her fingertip, the ink crackling under her touch. "They know. We hide here." She read it again and again, as if the letters might shift and offer her more. Who were they? Who was hiding? By noon, the pale light through the kitchen window did little to chase off the chill that had settled in her bones. She made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink and stared at the slip of paper until her eyes ached. Finally, she grabbed her laptop and settled at the tiny kitchen table. She typed in the house's address and the words history, Revolutionary War, hidden tunnels. Most of what came up were local legends, the same stories Ellen had hinted at. The house had belonged to a man named Silas Bradford, a known loyalist who had supposedly betrayed a ring of patriots hiding in the hills. Some said the house had a hidden cellar or tunnel where messages and people were smuggled right under British soldiers' noses. The deeper she dug, the darker it got. There were rumors that a group of rebel spies had been cornered in the house by loyalist troops and never seen again. Some claimed they'd been buried in the cellar walls. Others swore they still whispered to anyone willing to hear them. Rachel closed the laptop with a shaky breath. The cold draft that had haunted the house since they moved in now felt like more than just bad insulation. She didn't want to, but she lifted the floorboard again. Beneath where she'd found the parchment was a hollow space, deeper than she'd thought. She fetched Mark's flashlight from the toolbox and shone it inside. It was just wide enough for her to reach an arm in. The smell of old earth and dust made her eyes water. Her fingers brushed something hard. Metal? She fumbled around, tugging until it came free. A small tin box, rusted and dented at the corners. Rachel sat back on her heels, heart pounding. She forced the latch open. Inside were scraps of more parchment, folded carefully, and a tarnished brass button that looked older than the house itself. One slip of paper had a child's messy scrawl. "Don't let them find us. Tell Father." The floorboards creaked overhead. Rachel jumped so hard she nearly dropped the tin. But she was alone. She was alone, she reminded herself. But her skin prickled as if someone were watching. She stuffed the box into her bag. She needed answers, real ones, not half-whispers from the past. An hour later, she was standing in the local library, the tin tucked under her coat like contraband. The librarian, an older man named Thomas, peered over his glasses as she explained what she'd found. "This house, 12 Hawthorne Hill, you know anything about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas's eyes flicked to the tin in her hands. He leaned back in his chair, the old wood groaning under him. "Plenty of stories about that place," he said. "Bad ones, mostly. Some folks say Silas Bradford turned Patriot spies over to the Redcoats for money. But there's never been proof." Rachel showed him the scraps of parchment. Thomas squinted, turning them over carefully with gloved hands. "These are real," he murmured. "Could be. Old enough. Could be worth something to the Historical Society." Rachel barely heard him. She was staring at the brass button in the tin. It glowed dully in the library's warm light, a symbol etched into its face, an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch. "Military?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "Continental Army. Common insignia for messengers and scouts back then. Whoever owned this was deep in it." A chill raced up Rachel's spine. She remembered the whispers. "Help us. Under." "They were hiding," she said, "and they never got out." Thomas looked at her, his eyes suddenly sharp behind the thick lenses. "You might not want to dig too deep, Mrs. Connolly. Old stories have a way of sticking to folks. if you believe in that sort of thing. Rachel forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thanks for your help. Outside, the late afternoon sky had turned bruised purple. The tin felt heavier in her bag as she hurried to her car, the whispers echoing behind her like footsteps in the snow. They know. Tell Father. Help us. Chapter 5 The Message. Rachel got home just before dark. The sun slipped behind the trees as she pulled into the gravel drive, headlights catching on the sagging porch. She sat in the car for a moment, the tin box heavy in her lap. Mark's car was still gone. She'd hoped he'd be home. Even his snoring would have been a comfort. But tonight, she'd have to face the house alone. Inside, the air felt colder than before, as if the walls themselves held their breath. She set the tin box on the kitchen table and turned on every lamp she could find. Pools of warm light pushed back the shadows, but not far enough. She spread out the parchment scraps, trying to piece together the scraps like a puzzle. Most were too faded to read, but one larger sheet caught her eye. She smoothed it gently under her palm. The ink was smeared but legible in places. Safe beneath the boards. If they come, tell him. The meeting place. Rachel's mind raced. A meeting place for who? Patriots? Spies? Who were they hiding from? A sudden noise made her jump. A soft tap, tap, tap echoed from the hallway. She froze, listening. The wind? A branch? Tap, tap, tap. Closer this time, like footsteps on old wood. She grabbed the flashlight and moved to the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The tapping led her to the parlor, the only room they hadn't really unpacked yet. Dusty furniture draped in sheets made the space feel like a tomb. The sound stopped as soon as she stepped inside. She held her breath, straining to hear. Then she heard it, the whisper clearer than ever. Here, please. It came from behind the old fireplace. Rachel shone the flashlight at the brick, and there, near the floor, was a faint outline. A bricked-up hole, maybe once a crawl space. She dropped to her knees, running her fingers along the edges. Some of the mortar crumbled under her touch. Without thinking, she fetched a screwdriver from Mark's toolbox and began prying at the loose bricks. Dust choked the air, but she worked methodically, heart hammering. When the last brick fell away, a rush of stale, cold air hit her face. She aimed the flashlight into the darkness and saw a narrow tunnel, barely tall enough to crawl through. Rachel hesitated. Every sensible part of her screamed to stop, to wait for Mark to call someone, anyone. But the whispers filled her head, growing louder. Please, please, help. She crawled inside. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and old stone. Her hands scraped along the packed dirt as she pulled herself forward. Cobwebs clung to her hair and cardigan. The tunnel curved slightly, opening into a tiny chamber. She could stand here just barely. The beam of her flashlight danced across the walls. Carved into the stone were words, scratched over and over. Forgive us. Silas betrayed. We wait. In the center of the chamber, a bundle of old rags lay in the dirt. Bones, small, delicate, peeked through the rotting cloth. Rachel's throat tightened. Children, they'd hidden here and never left. The whispers crowded her mind. Not just words now, but emotions. Fear, desperation, betrayal. She fell to her knees beside the tiny remains, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't." The air shifted. For a heartbeat, the cold seemed to lift. The whisper stilled, not gone, but waiting. She understood. They weren't just haunting the house. They were trapped, stuck in the moment they died, needing someone to see them, to know. Rachel backed out of the chamber, hands shaking. She didn't bother sealing the bricks again. Back in the parlor, she sank to the dusty couch, pressing her palms to her eyes. The tin box, the papers, the bones in the wall. The message was clear now. They wanted to be found, to be freed from the silence that held them for centuries. When Mark finally came home that night, he found Rachel curled up on the couch, the fireplace open behind her, her hands covered in dirt and dust. "What happened?" he asked, panicked. "Rachel, are you okay?" She looked at him, her eyes red but calm. "We have to tell someone. We have to let them go." Chapter 6. Reckoning. Mark listened in stunned silence as Rachel told him everything. The whispers, the floorboard, the tin, the tunnel behind the fireplace. He sat on the edge of the dusty couch, his face pale in the flickering lamplight. When she finished, he ran a hand through his hair, leaving a smudge of dust on his temple. "Rach, you've been down there alone?" he asked, glancing at the dark mouth of the fireplace as if something might crawl back out. She nodded. "I had to. They were calling for help. Their children, Mark. They died down there, scared and alone. And they're still here." Mark opened his mouth, closed it, then exhaled shakily. "So what do you want to do? Call the cops? An exorcist?" He tried to laugh, but it came out as a weak cough. Rachel shook her head. "They don't want to hurt us. They want to be found, remembered. We have to tell someone who can lay them to rest properly." Mark stared at the cracked ceiling for a long moment. Then he pushed himself off the couch and knelt beside her. He took her hands, brushing dust from her knuckles. "Okay, then we do it. We call the historical society, the police, whoever. We tell the truth." Rachel pressed her forehead to his. "Thank you." The next morning they made the calls. The local police arrived first. Two skeptical officers who turned grave when they saw the bones hidden behind the fireplace wall. Then came a local historian from the county's small museum, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and excitement as Rachel showed him the tin box and the parchment scraps. The house filled with people. Crime scene tape on the porch, soft murmurs in the hallway. Rachel hovered in the kitchen, cradling a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Mark stayed close, squeezing her shoulder when she flinched at every new question. A young officer, Officer Rizzo, his badge red, stepped into the kitchen. He pulled off his cap, eyes darting nervously around the cracked plaster and peeling paint. "Mrs. Connolly," he said gently, "we'll take care of the remains. We'll contact the proper folks, a local archaeologist, the county coroner. It might take time, but they'll get a proper burial." Rachel felt tears slip down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from fear. "Thank you," she whispered. By evening, the house was quiet again. The investigators had left, promising more visits, more questions, more reports. Mark sat on the porch steps, watching the last car's taillights vanish down the drive. Rachel stood behind him, wrapped in a blanket. The chill of late fall was sharp now, but she felt warmer than she had in days. Mark tilted his head back to look at her. "You did it, you know," he said. "You heard them. You helped them." Rachel sank down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The woods rustled with dry leaves, but no whispers carried on the wind. Just the soft hush of branches brushing each other. For the first time since they moved in, the old house felt still, not empty but at peace. "Do you think they're gone?" Mark asked quietly. Rachel closed her eyes, listening. There was no voice, no tap 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 in the walls. Just the sigh of the breeze, the distant hoot of an owl. "I think they're free," she said. Mark wrapped an arm around her. Together, they sat on the porch as night folded around the house. The secrets buried in the walls had finally come to light. The whispers were gone, but the house, for the first time, felt like it might be a home. Epilogue. Spring arrived late that year, like the house itself needed time to thaw. The trees on Hawthorne Hill budded pale green against the clear sky, and for the first time since they'd moved in, Rachel opened all the windows to let the warm breeze sweep through the rooms. The repairs were slow but steady. A new coat of paint brightened the cracked plaster, and Mark had learned more about old boilers and creaking pipes than he'd ever wanted to know. The Historical Society came and went. Reporters sniffed around for a few weeks, writing articles about colonial tragedy unearthed in forgotten home. The bones, 4 children and 1 adult, it turned out, were buried in a small ceremony at the old cemetery on the edge of town. Rachel and Mark stood alone at the back, heads bowed as the priest murmured prayers for souls long lost. Sometimes Rachel thought she still heard the house sigh at night, the wood settling, the wind curling through the eaves. But it was different now. The oppressive hush had lifted. The house felt lighter. One warm afternoon, Rachel found herself standing in the parlor, the fireplace sealed now, the walls freshly painted a soft pale blue. She ran her fingers along the mantel, where she'd left a tiny bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, baby's breath, and sprigs of mint from the garden Mark had started out back. She thought she heard something then. Not a whisper this time, but laughter, light and distant. Children's laughter, carried on the breeze through an open window. She closed her eyes and smiled. A month later, Ellen stopped by to see the changes. She walked slowly through each room, trailing her fingers over new banisters and polished floors. "You've given it a good home," Ellen said at last, her smile gentle but tired. "This old place, it needed someone to listen." Rachel nodded, standing in the doorway, sunlight warming her back. "Maybe it can rest now. Maybe we all can." That night, Rachel dreamed of the hidden chamber behind the fireplace. But instead of cold and bones and darkness, it was full of warm light. Children played there, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. A man stood at the edge, young, with sharp eyes and a soldier's coat, a brass button glinting at his collar. He looked at Rachel and tipped his hat, a silent thank you drifting through her mind like a final breeze. When she woke, the house was quiet, peaceful. She turned toward Mark, still asleep, and let the spring sun spill over her face. She thought of the voices, the secrets, the fear that had once seeped through the floorboards. Gone now, or maybe not gone, but finally at rest. The house would always hold its ghosts, but now they were just part of its story, no longer lost, no longer whispering in the dark. Rachel rose and opened the window wide, letting the morning birdsong pour in. Somewhere, the house seemed to sigh, but it sounded almost like a contented breath. The end.